Welcome to the Experimentation Edge, where product managers, data scientists, and engineers talk about how they make smarter decisions. I'm Ashley Stirrup, the Chief Marketing Officer for Growthbook, and in each episode, I'll sit down with an executive to unpack how they use experimentation and A/B testing to make better decisions. This show is sponsored by Growthbook, the open source experimentation platform leader. Now let's jump in and get started with our next guest. Welcome to this episode of Experimentation Edge. I'm excited to have Suresh Tekchandani with us. Suresh is VP of Product and Technology at Ancestry, and he has a rich background working at other great companies like PayPal and eBay as well. So, Suresh, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Ashley, for having me on the show, and it's great to be here and discuss a topic that's close to my heart.
Well, that's great that it's close to your heart. It's definitely close to mine as well. Maybe to kick things off, I'd love to hear a little bit about where you would say Ancestry is in its experimentation journey.
Yeah, I would say in terms of the maturity curve, we are operating at scale now, Ashley. And the biggest unlock for us was when we started the experimentation, and we not just started to run new tests, but we focused on creating new capabilities. And these were not just incremental wins, as you would expect any organization to go through. And a good example is our metering infrastructure. So this was the first experiment that we ran a while ago called growth metering NPH widget, and that had flat primary metrics such as the registration rate, sign up rate, and so on. But we saw a very healthy lift of 5.3% in the new person hints review rate. And then you can think of hints as alerts that we send to our customers through email, and they can also see them when they log in. So on its own, that's a modest result, but what it unlocked was much bigger. It gave us the ability to meter resources like records and hints, and that allowed us to invest in that area at a much deeper level, and that led to some new capabilities that have become part of our platform now.
Interesting. And so I want to make sure I understand this. So you were kind of measuring the number of times you were sending like suggestions to your customers on things they could be doing. Is that right?
Yeah, so this was like especially geared towards our existing customers who were on our platform, or even the new ones who were coming on, and we would kind of show them some of the information. If you are not signed up yet, we show you some information to make sure that you understand what products and services we offer, right? And the goal there is to give them a taste of the product before they become a paid customer.
I see.
And we try to sort of, put a meter on those as to how many hints you can receive, what kind of content you can view, and those kinds of things. So that once you reach that limit, then we offer you a paywall, and then you go through that experience and you become a paid customer.
Right.
And we didn't have some of those abilities to meter these different dimensions that I referred to earlier.
Yeah.
And with this experiment, we saw that there was value to be had.
Yeah. And so, the results, did that allow you to send more hints, or were you getting more engagement?
Yeah, so that improved the number of customers who were coming in through the paywall, and they were becoming, paid subscribers.
Well, that's terrific.
Yeah, so the
Okay.
registration rate, sign up rate, all those things trended in the right direction, and
Yeah.
so that we could engage with them more, right? So we improved the
Right.
full experience for the customers.
Oh, yeah, that's a great win, and 5%, that's a lot.
Yeah.
That's pretty meaningful for the business, and so, how did that change how you thought about experimentation there?
So the way I think about experimentation after that experience, right? Yeah, that was fairly early on. It kind of it was a real shift going from isolated tests that you run to building capabilities, and where every experiment expands what you could do next. So at that point, experimentation stops being a tool and it becomes how you essentially run your business.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that's what there's kinda 2 dimensions to experimentation I think are really exciting. One is, that, A, you can just measure the impact of your feature investments, and like, are they actually impacting the business? But probably the more important one is increasing learning, understanding what your customers, get more value out of, what they respond to, what they don't respond to, that can then help you guide future investments. When you think about it on those two dimensions, is there one that you've gotten more results on than the other?
Absolutely. So I would say both, right? So you do want to have wins along the way, right? As you run these
Yes.
different experiments, you want to make sure that you have results to demonstrate that you are moving the right needle, right? And you're moving in the right direction as in terms of how you are evolving your product, right?
Yeah.
That's important. But what often gets overlooked, Ashley, is you can get too focused on these smaller wins and you lose sight of what you could be going after or achieving in terms of bringing on like entirely new experiences,
Yes.
investing in new capabilities that weren't realized or seen before you ran those experiments. So it's very important for you to, sort of zoom out, right,
Yeah.
as often as you can and see where are things going, how are things trending, what kinds of features are customers liking, where you see deeper engagement, where you're seeing drop off or more friction, where you're just losing customers' engagement rate. And I think those are the areas that could be important for you to realize, and you can alter your product direction so that you can continue to make it enticing, continue to make it interesting for customers to come onto your site, especially for a subscription business like ours, right?
Yes.
Engagement is key for us, right? The NPS is what we always think about, right? In all of our business metrics that we review, NPS is pretty high up. So we care
Yeah.
deeply about our customers, how they are feeling about the product that we're offering to them. Are they engaging in a meaningful way? Are they spending time at the right places on our site? Are they engaging on the areas where we are making deep investments in? So I think those are very important for us as well. In addition to what I said earlier, right? It's important to have those wins along the way
Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah, I just think it's so interesting, the trade-offs. If, let's say, you're a product manager, and of course you want to keep getting the incremental improvements on stuff that's already out there. How do you make it a little better and a little better? And then how do you apply experimentation to whole new capabilities? We had Cameron from Fixer AI there, an email AI tool. And one of the things he talked about is they would release a new feature and it would almost always fail at first. But if they believed in the feature, they would just keep iterating on it and then figure out how to turn that into a winner. And I think that kind of mindset for innovation is really important. Like, yes, you want to have some bets that are the incremental wins, and then you want to have some bets that are much bigger, and then recognize that you're going to test and learn from those in a very different way than you might be doing on the things where you're trying to get a 1% additional lift.
Yeah, absolutely. Well said.
So how are you organizing experimentation at Ancestry? Do you have like one centralized team, or have you kind of distributed it across the organization?
So the way we have structured the whole experimentation effort is we have a core team, centralized team that is responsible for the upkeep, maintenance of the experimentation platform. So this is the team that you work with in case if you have issues. We have made it pretty like, smooth at this point where somebody can go in and,
Create an
log in,
experiment?
navigate to the right place, schedule a new experiment. Even product managers can do it. You don't need to have technical background without necessarily having to coordinate with us. There are some things that we do coordinate as we do upgrades and form new baselines every 6 months or so. We reset the baseline so that you have, your test running against a specific baseline so you can draw, good, meaningful conclusions from your test. But by and large, people are fairly educated at this point. Initially there was some ramp up and some learning, but now I would say we are, like I said before, right at the opening, we are fairly mature in terms of how we run our tests now in the company.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. And do you have a framework, or like, if a feature looks like this, we need to test it, that type of thing?
So, generally, our approach is to guide people especially those who work on the front end, right? If you are going to change the customer experience in any meaningful way, we strongly recommend you run the test first, right? Because we've all been there where we had this strong gut feeling, right? We thought this thing is going to win. There was no question in their minds that this was going to win. But when you run the test, you see exactly opposite results. I can
Yeah.
give you an example of that. We've had some tests that we ran where we tried to improve customer experience by removing a friction. So this was like a content that presenting to the customers that forced that page to reload. That was causing the page to get refreshed. Now we thought, hey, why lose the context, right? Let's just introduce a new widget where customers can go in and click, and that opens up the new widget, and that content is contained in that widget. So it's much cleaner experience. Customers can just close the widget, go back to the page without having to do a full reload. And actually, to our surprise, we saw a huge drop in engagement on that page. The number of people who are trying to click on that widget, or the click through rate, it just fell by a huge percentage. I think it was about 20-25 percentage. So
Wow.
that was like huge drop in traffic, right, coming through from that page. We said, well, what happened? And we realized that we thought removing friction was a good thing, but what it was doing was it was like changing people's mental model, right? They were expecting a page refresh because that is how sort
Mhm.
of they were thinking of that page. And it provided them with a clean way to think about, I'm now going to a new experience. And we
Yeah.
took that ability away from them. So the learning there actually was not all friction is necessarily bad.
Yeah.
Sometimes it helps to set the context. It gives people a chance to get reset in their minds as to what they are about to do. And it can make them a little bit more thoughtful about how they interact with certain parts of your site or your product.
Yeah.
So it's something that doesn't come up in your UX discussions, because whenever we talk about revamping the UX or experience, we don't often think in terms of introducing friction by choice, so that it gives a chance to the customers to understand what's going on, right? Because if you move them too fast, they might not want to do that. They might not enjoy that experience.
Yeah.
Hopefully that
Yeah. No, that's a
answered.
great story. You could see how if you were a UX designer, though, you might feel a little let down in a situation like that, that you've come up with a design that you believe is clearly better, and then you test it and you see the negative results. Did were you able to turn that from like a negative experience into a learning experience for the team so people didn't feel like they were undermined by the results of the test?
No, look, I mean, we encourage folks to run test, and even if a test fails, but if you got some good learning from that, it's a win in my mind. No question about it, right?
Yeah.
The win could be a failed test too, as long as you get the learnings from that test. And that's
Yes.
important for you as you move your product roadmap forward.
Yes. I couldn't agree more. So, is there an example of a time where you use data to uncover like a new lever for growth in the business?
Yeah, I think I mentioned some of that already earlier, but I would say this was a test that was designed to um, impact how we told stories to our customers. So the core concept involved using AI to compare two records of the same ancestor by presenting this information as a story in their feed. So this approach actually aimed at driving deeper engagement by offering users a story-like experience rather than just looking at the raw records, right?
Right.
And the results were highly successful, revealing like AI-powered storytelling from record comparisons that turned out to be a significant new growth lever for us. And just to kind of give you a sense of the results, we saw very strong performance across the board, across all of our metrics. There was over 30% lift in storytelling click-through rate, CTR, over 100% increase in storytelling success rate, and over 500% increase in AI story view rate. So that told us that there was appetite, there was a need from the customer side to tell them these stories in a different way than just kind of throwing these raw records at them. And that's a very
Yeah.
strong signal, right?
Yeah.
And that became sort of a major growth lever for us. And it kind of shifted how we thought about engagement, Ashley, also. So that kind of shifted our mindset to go from delivering information to helping users interpret and connect with that information.
Yeah. Yeah. As you were telling that story, I was thinking like, boy, I guess that's really what Ancestry is all about, is helping people understand the story of their ancestors. And so anything you can do to kind of bring simple facts to life is pretty exciting.
Yeah, for sure. And look, we thought it was the right thing to do, and we experimented it, and customers agreed. It's like, yeah, we love it. You know,
Yeah. And so I would imagine that's an area that you've just continued to mine into. And are there ways you can go even further around the storytelling?
yeah, you can definitely kind of think along those lines and see where you want to take your roadmap, product roadmap, to see if you can bring more value for the customers, right? Because these are some of the cues that you have to drive from the customer engagement and the behavior, and see if there is value. So it actually works both ways. It delivers value to the customers, but it also tells us where to invest.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. And how do you think about what metrics you track? And do you have kind of one North Star metric, or is it more kind of a group of metrics?
So metrics, I would say there are like two kinds, right? There's input and there is output metrics, right? As you would imagine. In this context, we're talking about product, right? So most of our kind of metrics kind of focus around, the core metrics that we have, how many people are staying on the platform, cancellation rate, retention rate, how many registrations we're getting, sign up rates, things like that. So those kind of standard set of core metrics that we always track.
Yeah.
But at the individual feature level, Ashley, you have to come up with the metrics that you think you need to put in place as part of your experimentation, you know, test, or that you schedule
Right.
to run for a couple of weeks, or however long you want that test to run for. So you can provide those input metrics saying that if you have changed, let's say, how the content is viewed, or how the hints are displayed, or how the storytelling is occurring, right? So you would go in and put those kinds of metrics in the system. So we track those metrics as part of your feature, but we very closely monitor some of these output metrics that I talked about, right? If your
Yeah.
feature somehow improves your metrics, right? Let's say the customers are viewing your widget more, they are spending more time clicking this, clicking that, right? Whatever it is that the feature does. But if it hurts the core metrics that I talked about, then you want to take a step back and pause and see whether this is really actually helping, or it's becoming a drain. And we have a number of tests that we ran that, showed really strong performance at the experiment level, but our core metrics were started to move in the wrong direction. So we had to kind of take a pause there, and we sort of, roll back and then changed the experience so that we were not doing that.
Yeah. Yeah. That that's one really interesting challenge with A/B testing, is that sometimes a short-term metric like did engagement go up is what you can measure, but what you really care about is long-term retention. And so being able to kind of have that right mix of kind of understanding what you're measuring now, understanding how it relates to, your long-term metric, and then kind of understanding those trends, super important for making sure you're getting the best out of every investment that you make. So, out of curiosity, as you bring new people into the organization, do you ever get people kind of pushing back and saying, I don't need to A/B test this. I know it's a winner.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point that you're bringing up. It does happen because when you hire people, they come with very strong product background. They have spent years and decades in some cases, right, building these customer-facing experiences in highly successful and high growth companies. So I understand that part. So you encourage them to run these ideas as a test first, right? Especially if you are going to touch something on the front end that would have direct impact to the customer experience. Um, you'll be surprised, like I mentioned, right? In some cases that we saw, who would have thought, you know, removing friction would start to hurt your, business, right? Or your
Yes.
engagement metrics and such, right? But it does happen. It did happen with us
Yeah.
in some cases. Not always, but in some cases.
Yeah.
But the way I communicate and talk to the folks is those obvious changes are often the most risky changes, where we think that intuition can lead you to the decision, but they may not be actually supported by the actual data underneath, right?
Yeah.
So those features like that feel like they are guaranteed wins are usually the ones that we insist on experimenting more.
Yeah. Do you ever kind of try to put things through a lens of, okay, well, these features, the likely impact is, bigger. So therefore we must test these versus something you're like, okay, that's probably pretty minor. It's unlikely to impact things. And so maybe you prioritize the bigger swings.
We felt that investing more on the core customer experience would certainly help move the needle for the business by making sure that we are trying to test our theories and how we want to evolve the experience in a smaller group of users before we roll it out 100% was the right thing to do. But at the same time, there are some, like, if you're doing like, bug fixes or, bringing some consistency in your experiences, right? There's good argument to be made that, hey, why bother with experimenting that, right? So you can go and make those changes and see if that negatively hurts your metric over a period of time. But I wouldn't necessarily hold ourselves back from doing that.
Yeah.
But yeah, absolutely anything like customer facing, I strongly recommend we go through the experimentation cycle.
Yeah. And what I really heard you say there is that it's not about doing testing for the sake of testing. It's about doing testing for the sake of learning and making the product better. And so that making sure you kind of keep your focus on that, I think is super important.
Yeah, and it's very important to not beat yourself up too much if the test doesn't win, because that's an important learning, right? As long as, and I cannot say this often enough, right? I tell this to my team as well. It's like, as long as we are learning, we are winning.
Yep. I
Period.
couldn't agree. I couldn't agree more. What percent of your tests actually are winners?
I honestly have not done that kind of analysis to see
Yeah.
in terms of like raw numbers,
Right.
how many tests are the winners, because these things like get done at the individual teams level.
Sure. It's so interesting because it's so many of our customers, the win rate, like very rarely is it even as high as 30%. Usually, 20, 25% win rates, sometimes as low as 10. And, I think for a lot of product managers that, if they, in their head, maybe they've never really put a number on it, but in their head, they basically think that all of what they ship are winners. And you suddenly realize that, oh my goodness, only 25% are winners. It really changes your whole mindset. The experimentation just becomes so much more important.
Yeah, I mean, now that you've asked me that question, I'm going to go back and check. I'm curious now.
Yeah, yeah, I think you'll find it pretty interesting. So we're almost out of time here. So one last question: do you have any parting advice for a product or engineering leader who wants to use experimentation as a competitive edge?
Yeah, I would say the biggest shift is moving from testing to validate to experimenting to learn. So the best teams aren't just looking for wins, I would say they're optimizing for decision quality. And that's where the difference between good and great comes in. So that means getting the fundamentals right. I always tell people it's like start with clean baselines, proper audience selection, enough of your sample that you're trying to test against, and ensuring that you reach a statistical significance before you draw conclusions from the test. Without that, even strong looking results can mislead you, as you have seen in some of the examples that I talked about earlier. So to bring the point home, at scale, implementation is not just about trying to test individual features. It's about building a culture where you value learning.
Yeah, I really do believe that is the single most important thing. Because, if you're only shipping 25% winners, the faster you learn, the faster you move up that curve. And then, the fewer losers you're shipping, the more winners, the more you understand your customer, the more you're able to align your product roadmap with the things that matter most to customers. Well, Suresh, thank you so much for joining us today. This has been a great show. I feel like I've learned so much, and I'm sure our listeners have too. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Ashley, for having me on.
Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed this conversation, please support our channel by hitting the like button and subscribing. Better yet, share the episode with a friend. I'm Ashley Stirrup with Growth Book. We'll see you next time on the Experimentation Edge.